What if New Africa was formed? The Republic of New Africa is a concept envisioned by African Americans during the Civil Rights Movement. It seeks to separate the states of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina, and sometimes East Texas and North Florida from the United States and form a majority African American nation, namely the Republic of New Africa. This idea first emerged in 1968, but would go nowhere. But what if that didn't happen? What if New Africa was formed? In this timeline, instead of signing the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Lyndon B. Johnson decides to instead create the Republic of New Africa, which wouldn't even be proposed until 4 years later. And thus the 5 states of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina would become a new country, with Florida being like Alaska, an American enclave. The whites in these 5 states, namely 1.8 million Louisianians, 1.2 Mississippians, 2.1 million Alabamians, 2 million Georgians, and 1.5 million South Carolinians, so a total of 8.6 million whites would be expelled. They would flee to neighboring states like Florida, North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Texas. As a result of white retaliation and fear, many African Americans, especially from the Deep South, would find themselves in New Africa, which increases its population up to by around 8 million. In New Africa, the states would remain as they are, but their names would change. Mississippi and Alabama keep their name, but Louisiana was named Tubman in honor of Harriet Tubman, South Carolina was named Douglas in honor of Frederick Douglass, and Georgia was named King, giving that this is the home state of Martin Luther King Jr. The cities too were renamed. New Orleans became New Lagos, their capital Jackson became Malcolm after Malcolm X, Montgomery became Brown after Civil War General William H. Brown. Their biggest city, Atlanta, kept its name, and Columbia was named Abibacarai. Religiously, a whopping 78% are Protestants, with 59% of those being Black Protestants, 15% being Evangelion, and 4% mainline Protestants. Other Christian groups account for 7%, with Catholics 5%, Jehovah's Witnesses 1%, and other Christian groups another 1%. Muslims and other religions both make up 1% each, and 2% are atheists, with the last 11% being unaffiliated. However, largely thanks to the Nation of Islam, the amount of Muslims would grow to around 10 to 15% nowadays. In terms of politics, the country follows, like the United States, a presidential system. They also have a bicameral Congress. The House of Representatives has 100 seats. Mississippi holds 6, Tubman 8, Alabama and Douglas 9 each, and King 18 seats. The Senate, meanwhile, contains 100 seats that are determined by share of vote. But unlike the United States, the president is elected by popular vote rather than an electoral college, and 4 major parties would emerge. The Black Panthers Party, or BPP, which is an openly Marxist-Leninist party and is the most leftist of the bunch. The Democratic Party of New Africa, or DEPNA, which is a liberal and progressive party that has close ties to its white counterpart in the United States. The Christian Democratic Party, or CDP, a Christian Democratic and conservative party that, unlike the DEPNA, holds no ties to its American counterpart despite of sharing many policies and ideological similarities. And lastly, the Nation of Islam, or NOI, which is a nationalistic, pseudo-religious party that denounces any approachment with the United States, with some factions similar to some factions of the BPP wanting to establish a dictatorship. The first presidential election in 1964 was won by a landslide by Democratic Martin Luther King Jr., and the DEPNA even won a majority in both chambers in Congress. MLK would become first president of New Africa, and Jesse Jackson first vice president. Carol Moseley Brown would become Senate Majority Leader, and John Conyers Speaker of the House. In 1968, the Black Panthers, Christian Democrats, and a Nation of Islam would form an unusual coalition to oppose the popularity of MLK. Their presidential candidate is Christian Democrat Melvin H. Evans, and his running mate is Huey P. Newton from the Black Panthers. Christian Democrat Edward Brooke would run for the Senate, and nationalist Elijah Muhammad Wakeldi run for the position of Speaker. However, their efforts were to no avail because the Democrats won by the slimmest of majorities, with 51% of the popular vote. The coalition would, after their failure, disband, and with MLK not being able to run anymore, the DEPNA wouldn't be invincible anymore. In the following years, New Africa would develop as the wealthiest black country in the world. The BPP and NOI would both fade away in favor of the Party of Social Democracy or PSD and Nationalist Party of Africans or NPA. The current president of New Africa is Christian Democrat Tim Scott. In the United States, the Senate would shrink by 10 seats to just 90, while in the House the amount of seats remains at 435, meaning that the other states would be given extra seats. LBJ would lost in one of the biggest landslide in American history, and Barry Goldwater becomes president, and he would be re-elected in 1968. In 1972 and 1976, George McGovern becomes president, followed by Ronald Reagan, and after that president elections until 2000, when Al Gore becomes president, because the Deep South, which voted for Bush in our own timeline, doesn't exist anymore. He then wins re-election in 2004 against Donald Trump. In 2008, John McCain defeats Hillary Clinton, and then in 2012, John Wolfe Jr. In 2016, Bernie Sanders would win against Ted Cruz, and then in 2020 against Bill Weld. In the United States, racism towards black people as a topic would largely not exist because of the lack of black people, but those that do exist would regularly get attacked, and a resident of the Ku Klux Klan may occur. It is also possible that white nationalists stage border conflicts along the United States-New Africa border to get the United States to declare war on New Africa and reclaim the lands that they lost in 1964. On a global change, this may not have too great ramifications, as this wouldn't impact the Cold War or other events like the War on Terror or War in Donbass. A change could, however, happen in Africa, with New Africa investing heavily into African countries to further develop these countries, and they may help African nations in civil conflicts to help the more democratic side. By now, New Africa could have a lot of influence in Africa, and though not in Africa, may join the African Union. In a global perspective, the Republic of New Africa would be largely neutral, but would favor the United States, as they are both liberal democracies, and New Africa would see China as a rival in the African continent that supports despots and traps them in a debt trap. In this timeline, the Republic of New Africa would be a black state in mainland North America, and would be in many things similar to the United States. While they do hold good relations on paper, not everything is perfect. The RNA would be the most prosperous majority black state, and they would find themselves in a Cold War with China over the African continent, and their existence could lead to a more powerful African continent. If you liked the episode, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Goodbye.